The Trillion-Dollar Shield, the hidden economics of corporate security. It is a Tuesday morning in a glass-walled finance office in Hong Kong. The chief financial officer sits at his mahogany desk, staring intently into the high-definition lens of his webcam. On the screen, his multinational company's UK-based chief executive and several regional directors are giving him direct, urgent instructions to authorize a series of secret wire transfers. The voices are perfectly modulated. The facial micro-expressions are entirely natural, and the lighting matches their respective offices flawlessly. But as the chief financial officer clicks approve on a $25 million transaction, he does not realize that every single person on that video call is a highly sophisticated, real-time artificial intelligence deepfake. When we look at the titans of global industry, we see their polished products, their ubiquitous marketing campaigns, and their soaring quarterly profit margins. What we do not see is the invisible army. We do not see the trillion-dollar shadow machine working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to protect those assets from physical attack, digital sabotage, supply chain collapse, and the silent theft of ideas. In the modern era of global capitalism, the creation of wealth is only half the equation. The other half, the darker and far more expensive half, is the preservation of that wealth against an endless array of asymmetric threats. This documentary maps that machine. It is a journey into the hidden economics of corporate security, an industry that has quietly evolved from a minor administrative overhead into the most critical, mathematically justified line item on a Fortune 500 balance sheet. Welcome to Money Origins. By the end of this documentary, you will understand why the true cost of doing business at the absolute highest echelon of the global economy is largely invisible to the public eye. You will see how the protection of the corporate empire is no longer just about hiring bodyguards or installing firewalls, but about deploying private intelligence networks, negotiating with digital syndicates, and underwriting the physical movement of global trade through active war zones. We will dissect the brutal, uncompromising economics of corporate survival, revealing why the companies that treat security as a mere compliance exercise are already losing, and why the trillion-dollar shield is the ultimate foundation of modern wealth creation. The battlefield is everywhere, and the cost of entry is astronomical. Chapter 1. The Executive Fortress. It is 6:15 in the morning on a rainy Tuesday in Seattle, and a Fortune 500 chief executive is preparing for his morning commute. But nothing about this commute is ordinary, and every variable has been calculated by a team of professionals he will never meet. Before he even steps out of his front door, a private intelligence team has already swept his route for potential protests, analyzed local crime syndicate movements, and verified the structural integrity of the bridges he will cross. The vehicle waiting in his driveway is not a standard luxury sedan. It is a bespoke armored transport capable of withstanding military-grade ballistics and chemical attacks. The driver is a former special operations operative, and the seemingly empty streets are being monitored by a discreet advance team moving in parallel, unmarked vehicles. In the realm of corporate finance, there is a concept known as key person risk. It is the financial vulnerability a company faces when its operations, strategic vision, or public confidence are inextricably tied to a single individual. When a visionary founder or a highly effective chief executive officer is compromised, the resulting market panic can erase tens of billions of dollars in market capitalization overnight. Therefore, the physical protection of corporate leadership is not a luxury perk. It is a material fiduciary duty. The Securities and Exchange Commission requires public companies to disclose the compensation and benefits of their top executives. If a company spends money on an executive's personal security and it is deemed a personal benefit rather than a strictly necessary business expense. It must be reported in the annual proxy statement. These filings offer a rare, verifiable glimpse into the economics of the executive fortress. Consider Meta Platforms. In recent fiscal years, including 2023 and 2024, Meta's proxy statements have consistently revealed an expenditure of approximately $26.8 million to $27 million annually solely for the personal security of its founder and chief executive officer, Mark Zuckerberg, and his family. This $27 million budget funds a comprehensive around-the-clock protective apparatus. It includes heavily armored vehicles, advanced residential fortifications featuring ballistic glass and biometric access controls, and a rotating team of elite close protection operatives. But it also funds something far more critical: private intelligence. Before the chief executive travels, advanced teams analyze geopolitical risk, local crime syndicates, and potential protest movements. Contrast this massive expenditure with Apple. For Chief Executive Officer Tim Cook, Apple's proxy statements typically report personal security expenditures ranging from $1.5 million to $2.4 million annually. Why the massive disparity between a $2 million and a $27 million security budget? The commercial logic is rooted in public profile and threat vectors. Zuckerberg, as the architect of the world's most dominant social media platforms, frequently finds himself at the center of intense political controversies, regulatory hearings, and public backlash. His threat profile is exceptionally high. Cook, while immensely powerful, maintains a much lower public profile, focusing on supply chain logistics and operational execution. The market demands a return on security spending. Apple's board has calculated that $2.4 million sufficiently mitigates the key person risk associated with Tim Cook. Beyond the physical bodyguards and armored glass, a massive secondary market exists to protect the executive class: kidnap and ransom insurance. Multinational corporations operating in emerging markets routinely purchase these policies for their traveling executives. The geographic triggers for the highest premiums are highly specific. The kidnapping hotspots of Latin America, particularly Mexico and Venezuela. The volatile regions of West Africa, such as Nigeria, and certain parts of Southeast Asia, like the Philippines. The primary underwriters for these policies are the specialized syndicates at Lloyd's of London. But a kidnap and ransom policy is not simply a reimbursement check for a paid ransom. It is a comprehensive crisis management contract. Consider what the contract actually looks like when it is activated. A regional director for a major European construction conglomerate is being driven to a site visit in Lagos, Nigeria. Without warning, 2 vehicles box in his sedan. Masked men pull him from the car and shove him into a waiting van. Within 45 minutes, the company's security desk in London receives a phone call. The kidnappers demand $8 million. What follows is a precisely choreographed crisis response. By hour 12, a secure negotiation channel is opened through a local intermediary, while a forensic accountant begins mapping the syndicate's known cryptocurrency wallets and regional banking networks. The crisis consultant, a former MI6 officer who boarded a private jet from London within 3 hours of the call, advises the board against immediate compliance, leveraging psychological pressure tactics to verify the hostage is alive and to stretch out the timeline. Over the next 72 hours, the negotiation team builds a detailed profile of the captors, determining their financial desperation and their historical release patterns, ultimately securing a proof of life and structuring a complex multi-currency payment that ensures the executive's safe return while minimizing the financial payout. Once the victim is released, the same policy covers intensive psychiatric aftercare for months afterward for both the victim and their traumatized family. This is not a reimbursement form. It is a full-spectrum human recovery operation. For a high-risk executive traveling frequently to these volatile regions, the annual premium for this level of protection can easily range from $50,000 to over $150,000 per individual. The economics of the executive fortress are driven by a cold, asymmetric calculus because the stock market treats executive physical integrity as a highly sensitive variable. We only need to look at the historical precedent of Apple's co-founder, Steve Jobs. In 2008, when rumors about Jobs' declining health and pancreatic cancer began to circulate, Apple's stock plummeted by nearly 10% in a matter of days. The market panic was so severe that the Securities and Exchange Commission later opened an inquiry to determine whether Jobs' medical condition should have been disclosed earlier as a material risk to shareholders. The cost of a kidnapped chief executive, an assassinated founder, or a compromised leader yielding corporate secrets under duress is not merely a human tragedy. It is a catastrophic corporate event that triggers immediate stock sell-offs, board-level instability, and aggressive moves by short sellers. When viewed through this lens, a $27 million annual security budget to protect a leader who oversees a $1 trillion market capitalization is not an extravagant expense. It is a highly leveraged, exceptionally cheap insurance policy. The executive fortress is built of steel, armor, and private intelligence, designed to protect the physical bodies that steer the corporate ship. But in the 21st century, the most devastating attacks leave no physical trace whatsoever, and the battlefield has moved entirely out of sight. The new war zone lives inside every machine your company has ever connected to the internet. Chapter 2. The Cyber Battlefield and Ransom Economics. It is 3:47 in the morning in a glass-walled network operations center in Rotterdam. The engineer on duty is watching his screens, sipping cold coffee, when the first anomaly appears. One by one, the servers are going dark, not crashing, not throwing error codes, but simply disappearing as if they never existed. By the time he reaches for the emergency phone to alert the Global Information Technology Director, 45,000 machines across 6 continents have already been erased. It is June 27, 2017. And the circulatory system of global trade is experiencing a massive simultaneous cardiac arrest. To understand the sheer scale of the cyber battlefield, we must examine the gold standard of digital corporate destruction, the NotPetya attack on AP Moller-Maersk. Maersk is not just a shipping company. It is the logistical backbone of the global economy, moving roughly 20% of the world's seaborne freight. In June 2017, a piece of malware, later attributed to Russian military intelligence, infiltrated the network via a compromised Ukrainian tax software update. The malware was designed to wipe data permanently, not just encrypt it for a ransom. Within minutes, the infection cascaded through the global infrastructure. 45,000 personal computers and 4,000 servers were entirely obliterated. The digital nervous system was instantly paralyzed. Ports ground to a halt from Los Angeles to Rotterdam. Trucks could not enter terminals. Refrigerated containers filled with perishable goods began to rot because the automated temperature monitoring systems were dead. The executive team was forced to make an unprecedented decision. They essentially had to rebuild their entire global information technology infrastructure from scratch, reinstalling over 4,000 applications and recovering data from isolated offline backups. In their subsequent earnings reports, the company quantified the direct financial impact of the attack between $200 million and $300 million in lost revenue and recovery costs. This was a direct hit to the bottom line, entirely caused by a digital breach. While that attack was an act of geopolitical sabotage, the modern corporate threat is largely purely economic. Consider the Colonial Pipeline attack in May 2021. A syndicate of cybercriminals known as DarkSide breached the digital perimeter of the pipeline, which supplies 45% of the fuel to the United States East Coast. The operational shutdown triggered panic buying, localized fuel droughts, and the grounding of major airline flights. The headline number was a $4.4 million ransom paid in Bitcoin within hours to unlock the company's paralyzed billing systems. While the Department of Justice eventually recovered a portion of those funds, the operational downtime and secondary economic disruption cost hundreds of millions of dollars. The ransom itself was merely a rounding error in the grand calculus of corporate survival. We have entered the era of the ransomware economy, a highly structured, multi-billion-dollar illicit industry operating on a ransomware as a service model. These syndicates operate with the professionalism of Fortune 500 companies. They utilize an affiliate revenue split model, typically paying 70 to 80% of the extorted ransom to the independent hacker who found the vulnerability, while the core syndicate retains 20 to 30% for providing the malware infrastructure. They recruit these affiliates on exclusive, invite-only dark web forums, requiring proof of previous successful breaches. Once the ransom is paid in cryptocurrency, the syndicates use sophisticated mixing and tumbling services to launder the proceeds through thousands of microtransactions, rendering the funds virtually untraceable. We have seen this model perfected by syndicates like DarkSide, which executed the Colonial Pipeline attack, Revel, which crippled the Kaseya network, affecting 1,500 businesses simultaneously, and Lockbit, which operated as the most prolific and ruthless syndicate of 2022 and 2023, complete with a dedicated customer support portal. To understand the full horror of what a ransomware attack looks like from the inside, consider the moment a corporate board is forced to make the most agonizing financial decision of its existence. The call comes at 2 in the morning. The company's entire production environment is encrypted. A dark web chat portal has appeared on the one machine the attackers left functional, and a message is waiting. The tone is almost unbearably professional. It reads like a customer service interaction. There is a countdown timer, there is a price, and there is a promise. Pay within 72 hours, and a decryption key will be delivered. Refuse, and the ransom doubles. Refuse again, and the stolen data goes to the press. The board convenes an emergency session. Legal counsel advises caution. The chief financial officer runs the numbers. $5 million to the criminals, or $500 million in operational downtime, regulatory fines, and class action litigation. The vote is taken quietly, and the wire transfer is approved before sunrise. This brutal calculation has birthed a massive negotiation economy populated by professional ransom negotiators and forensic accounting firms who act as intermediaries between corporations and criminal enterprises. While federal law enforcement strongly advises against paying ransoms, arguing that it funds future attacks, the reality on the ground is dictated by cyber insurance policies. The cyber insurance market has exploded from $3.15 billion in 2020 to a projected $22.5 billion by 2025. According to Fitch Ratings, premiums have hiked by over 50% in recent years. Yet these policies frequently cover extortion payments, inadvertently funding the very syndicates that perpetuate the attacks. Consequently, the economics of cybersecurity have shifted from reactive patching to proactive architectural defense. According to Gartner, global end-user spending on security and risk management consistently exceeds $200 billion annually. Corporations are no longer just buying firewalls. They are investing heavily in zero-trust architectures where no user or device is trusted by default, and continuous behavioral analytics powered by machine learning monitor for anomalous data exfiltration. The mathematical case is undeniable. When the average cost of a data breach is calculated at $4.45 million by IBM, and reputational damage multiplies that figure by orders of magnitude, a $50 million annual security budget is not an expense. It is a vital hedge against corporate extinction. The digital shields are vast, expensive, and constantly evolving, but they only protect the data that flows through the network. The physical products, the raw materials, and the tangible assets that generate that revenue must still cross the most dangerous, unpredictable environments on Earth. The battlefield is about to leave the server room and step onto the open ocean. Chapter 3: Securing the Global Veins. It is 2 a.m. in the narrow waters of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, separating the Horn of Africa from the Arabian Peninsula. A 400-meter container ship carrying tens of thousands of tons of consumer electronics and medical supplies is navigating the dark, turbulent waters. On the stern deck, silhouetted against the moonlight, 3 private security contractors in tactical gear are scanning the horizon with thermal optics. The ship's radar is tracking 2 fast-moving skiffs approaching from the Yemeni coastline, and the captain's hand is hovering over the alarm that will seal the crew inside the ship's armored citadel. Data flows through fiber optic cables, but the physical world still runs on steel and diesel. Approximately $14 trillion of global trade is conducted annually, and 80% of that volume is carried by sea. The global supply chain relies on a series of fragile maritime choke points: the Suez Canal, the Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Malacca, and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Securing these global veins is a monumental logistical and financial undertaking, governed by the complex economics of marine cargo insurance and private risk mitigation. When one of these arteries is blocked or threatened, the shock waves are felt in every retail store and manufacturing plant on the planet. To understand the economics of maritime risk, we must look at the Somali piracy era between 2008 and 2012. At its peak, the pirate ransom economy was generating over $238 million in active payouts, but the ransom was only a fraction of the true cost. The global shipping industry absorbed between $7 billion and $12 billion per year in rerouting costs, spiked insurance premiums, and the deployment of armed guards. Yet behind those billions lies a human cost that is rarely told. In April 2009, the Maersk Alabama was transiting the Indian Ocean when 4 armed Somali pirates boarded the vessel. The crew locked themselves in the engine room, but Captain Richard Phillips surrendered himself to protect his men. He was taken hostage in a small lifeboat, held at gunpoint for 5 harrowing days, while a United States Navy destroyer and SEAL snipers positioned themselves for a rescue. During those days, Phillips sat in sweltering heat, with almost no food or water, facing the barrel of an assault rifle, bargaining for his life. The rescue, when it came, was a single precise moment. 3 pirates killed, 1 captured, and Phillips was pulled to safety, physically broken, but alive. Captain Phillips endured 5 days. Many other crews were not so fortunate. Throughout the Somali piracy crisis, dozens of ships were held for 6, 8, even 10 months. Crew members, often from the Philippines or India, were confined to their own vessels, beaten, starved, and psychologically tormented, while ransom negotiations dragged on in boardrooms thousands of miles away. They endured mock executions, witnessed the slow deterioration of shipmates who fell ill without access to medicine, and waited in the darkness not knowing if anyone was coming. This human dimension fundamentally altered the crisis calculus for shipping conglomerates, transforming maritime security from a mere logistical expense into an urgent moral and operational imperative. The pirates were ultimately defeated not by military force alone, but by making the economic return on investment for a hijacking mathematically unviable. History repeated itself during the Red Sea crisis that escalated throughout late 2023 and 2024. Following targeted strikes by Houthi militants on commercial vessels, the world's major shipping conglomerates, including Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd, were forced to abandon the Suez Canal route for Europe and the United States East Coast. Instead, they rerouted their fleets around the southern tip of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope. The commercial logic of this decision is staggering. Rerouting a megaship adds between 10 to 14 days to the voyage. It requires significantly more fuel, adding upwards of $1 million in operational costs per trip. And it ties up the vessel's capacity, artificially constricting global supply and driving up freight rates across the entire market. But for those ships that did continue to transit the Red Sea, the financial burden shifted entirely to the insurance markets. The Lloyd's of London Market Association's Joint War Committee designated the Red Sea and surrounding waters as a high-risk zone. Almost overnight, war risk insurance premiums skyrocketed. Prior to the escalation, war risk premiums were negligible, often around 0.07% of the ship's hull value. Following the attacks, premiums spiked by over 1,000%, jumping to 0.7% or even 1% of the hull value. For a modern container ship valued at $150 million, the insurance premium for a single transit jumped from roughly $105,000 to over $1 million to $1.5 million. The cost of simply passing through a 30-mile stretch of water became a massive, localized tax on global trade. To mitigate these skyrocketing insurance costs and the physical risk of a destroyed asset, shipping companies deploy private maritime security companies. In international waters and where permitted by complex flag state laws, vessels hire teams of armed contractors. A team of 3 to 4 operatives costs between $3,000 and $5,000 per day. These contractors are trained to use long-range acoustic devices and warning shots to deter boarding attempts. If a vessel is overwhelmed, the crew retreats to the citadel, a heavily reinforced, hidden safe room inside the ship with independent communications and engine controls designed to hold out until naval forces arrive. Every physical product on a retail shelf contains a fractional premium paid to these private armies and the actuarial scientists who underwrite their voyages. Beyond the physical transit, the post-pandemic era has forced corporations to radically redesign supply chain resilience. Companies like Apple, Toyota, and Samsung have abandoned the hyper-efficient, just-in-time models of the past in favor of dual sourcing strategies and massive strategic buffer stocks. Toyota's response to the 2011 Fukushima disaster, which wiped out critical component suppliers overnight, became the industry template. Never again rely on a single geographic source for any mission-critical part. Apple now maintains a dedicated geopolitical risk team whose sole function is to anticipate which factory, which port, and which trade corridor might disappear tomorrow. They pay private intelligence firms millions of dollars annually to map these risks in real time, ensuring that a single localized conflict cannot halt their global production lines. The ships are armored, the routes are insured, and the physical cargo is protected by armed guards and naval coalitions. But what happens when the cargo is not a physical container, but a proprietary algorithm? When the true value of the corporation cannot be seen, touched, or tracked on a radar screen, the war moves into the shadows. Chapter 4. Corporate Espionage and the War for Ideas. It is the senior engineer's last day at a sprawling Silicon Valley campus. He hands his badge to the security desk, carries a small cardboard box to his car, and drives away into the afternoon sun. What the corporate security team does not know is that hidden inside the engineer's personal laptop, buried within encrypted dummy files, are 14,000 highly confidential documents detailing the exact architectural blueprints of the company's next-generation autonomous driving sensors. 6 months later, that same engineer will stand on a stage in a different country, presenting what he calls his own breakthrough technology to a room full of investors. Physical assets can be replaced, and supply chains can be rerouted. But the true crown jewels of the modern corporation are entirely intangible. Intellectual property, proprietary algorithms, and trade secrets are the engines of market dominance, and they are the primary targets in the silent, ongoing war for ideas. The financial stakes of intellectual property protection are astronomical. Consider the landmark legal battle between Alphabet's Waymo and Uber. The dispute centered on the alleged theft of over 14,000 confidential files related to autonomous driving LiDAR technology by a former Waymo engineer, Anthony Lewandowski, who subsequently sold his startup to Uber. The litigation was a brutal war of attrition, ultimately resulting in a settlement where Uber agreed to pay Waymo a 0.34% equity stake, valued at approximately $245 million at the time. But the financial damage extends far beyond legal settlements. It is the permanent loss of the competitive moat. This is not an isolated incident of corporate opportunism. It is a systemic, global crisis. The Federal Bureau of Investigation estimates that China-linked economic espionage results in the theft of intellectual property valued between $225 billion and $600 billion annually. The most heavily targeted industries are those that require massive capital expenditure and years of research: semiconductors, advanced pharmaceuticals, aerospace engineering, and artificial intelligence. The theft of a single semiconductor manufacturing process can erase a decade of research and development expenditure in a matter of seconds, fundamentally altering the global balance of technological power. Nowhere is this vulnerability more heavily guarded or more devastating when breached than in the pharmaceutical industry. Consider the landmark trade secret theft case involving GlaxoSmithKline, which fundamentally rewired how the global life sciences sector approaches data security. A senior scientist named Yu Shui systematically exfiltrated highly confidential oncology research and proprietary manufacturing protocols over a period of several years. The theft was not discovered through a dramatic cyber intrusion, but through a routine internal audit that flagged unusual high-volume data transfers to an external personal server. The research Yu Shui stole was valued at over $1 billion, representing years of clinical trials and biochemical engineering designed to create groundbreaking cancer treatments. She attempted to sell this intellectual property to state-sponsored entities and rival firms in China, operating under the guise of her own independent biotechnology startup. Following a rigorous federal investigation, she was convicted and sentenced to 18 months in prison, alongside significant financial restitution. However, the true damage was the permanent compromise of a billion-dollar competitive moat. This specific case sent shockwaves through the industry, permanently changing how pharmaceutical companies structure data access globally, forcing them to implement extreme compartmentalization and to treat every insider as a potential vector for catastrophic intellectual property loss. The economics of drug development make these countermeasures a mathematical certainty. It costs an average of $2.3 billion and 10 years of rigorous testing to bring a single new drug to market, according to the Tufts Center for the Study of Drug Development. When a competitor or a foreign state can simply steal the final formula, spending $50 million annually on data loss prevention and internal counterintelligence is not an overhead cost. It is the price of staying in business. To combat this, mega corporations spend billions on internal security architectures that rival those of national intelligence agencies. This begins with physical compartmentalization. Tech giants and defense contractors construct sensitive, compartmented information facilities within their corporate headquarters. These rooms are built with acoustic dampening to prevent laser microphone eavesdropping, Faraday cages to block all electromagnetic signals, and strict biometric access controls. Inside these facilities, no personal electronic devices are permitted. However, the most dangerous vector for corporate espionage is not a foreign hacker, it is the insider. According to the Ponemon Institute, the average cost of an insider threat incident has risen to over $16 million per organization annually. To mitigate this, corporations deploy rigorous, continuous background checks, supported by a $4.5 billion background screening industry and advanced insider threat management software. These systems utilize zero-trust architectures and machine learning to monitor employee behavior at a granular level. If an engineer with access to core artificial intelligence models suddenly downloads 3 gigabytes of code to an external drive at 2 in the morning, the system automatically revokes their access and alerts the Corporate Security Operations Center. Micro-segmentation ensures that no single employee has access to the entirety of a proprietary process. In the war for ideas, the fortress is not built of stone and steel. It is built of code, cryptography, and absolute uncompromising compartmentalization. The shields are in place. The executives are guarded, the networks are encrypted, the ships are armored, and the intellectual property is locked inside digital vaults. But the adversaries are not standing still. The very tools used to build the modern empire are now being weaponized to tear it down. Conclusion: the future of fear. We have mapped the architecture of the trillion-dollar shield. From the $27 million executive fortresses to the $300 million cyber battlegrounds to the $1 million maritime insurance premiums and the billion-dollar intellectual property vaults, the global corporate security apparatus is projected to spend upwards of $600 billion every single year by the end of this decade to protect tens of trillions in value. It is a vast, invisible ecosystem of actuaries, private intelligence officers, cybersecurity analysts, and armed contractors, all engaged in a perpetual high-stakes arms race against those who seek to dismantle the global economy. But the threat landscape is evolving faster than the defenses can adapt. We are entering the era of asymmetric, artificial intelligence-powered warfare. The $25 million Hong Kong deepfake case is merely the proof of concept. In the near future, generative artificial intelligence will allow criminal syndicates to automate hyper-personalized, real-time attacks at a global scale, bypassing human verification entirely. Autonomous cyberattacks will use machine learning systems to probe corporate networks for vulnerabilities faster than human patch cycles can respond. Simultaneously, the geopolitical fracturing of the world means that supply chains are no longer just vulnerable to pirates or localized conflicts. They are vulnerable to state-sponsored sabotage, weaponized tariffs, and the sudden violent end of globalization as a baseline security assumption. The most sophisticated corporations in the world understand this, and they have already moved beyond the notion of building a perfect wall. Today, the most advanced Fortune 100 companies run regular war game simulations, bringing in former intelligence officers and elite hackers to spend weeks attempting to breach their own defenses. These red team exercises, once the exclusive domain of governments and military installations, are now standard practice at the highest levels of global business, because the question is no longer whether a breach will happen, The question is whether the organization will survive it. This brings us to the ultimate realization of the modern corporate condition. The arms race between protection and threat has no finish line, and there is no final victory to be won. Every single dollar spent on building a higher wall, a thicker vault, or a more complex encryption protocol simply creates a financial incentive for an adversary to develop a more sophisticated method of breaching it. The shield is not a static object. It is a living, breathing economic organism that must consume vast amounts of capital just to maintain the status quo. The corporations that will dominate the next century are not those who believe they can build impenetrable fortresses because the impenetrable fortress is a myth. The true market leaders will be those who build the most adaptive, intelligent, and self-healing systems. They will be the entities that assume the breach will happen, that assume the physical perimeter will fail, and that assume the insider will turn. By designing their operations to absorb, isolate, and instantly recover from catastrophic shocks, they transform security from a defensive cost center into the ultimate offensive weapon. In a world defined by perpetual vulnerability, resilience is the only true monopoly. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the hidden economics of global business here on Money Origins. If you found this analysis valuable, please subscribe to the channel for more comprehensive financial documentaries. Like this video to help the algorithm and leave a comment below answering our closing question. Which of these domains, cybersecurity, physical executive protection, or global supply chain risk, do you believe will dominate corporate spending in the next decade? We read every single comment. When you are ready to explore how the world's most powerful private intelligence agencies operate, click the screen to watch our next documentary right here.